Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at one of the most fascinating and, frankly, absolutely critical defense mechanisms in the entire global financial system. We're going to explore exactly how institutions spot bad actors who are actively trying to hide or right in plain sight. It's this complex, high-stakes game of cat and mouse, and untangling it has been a really fascinating journey. It's essentially required knowledge for grasping how modern financial crime controls actually work.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, beyond the front door. Second, how transaction monitoring works. Third, the Calibration Balancing Act. Fourth, governance and human oversight. And finally, number 5, the bridge to action.
All right, starting off with section 1, beyond the front door.
There's this really common misconception out there that getting through a bank's front door is a financial criminal's biggest hurdle. We tend to think, well, once you pass those initial background checks, the system is totally secure, right? But actually, getting in is only half the battle. So is onboarding and due diligence enough to stop financial crime? The short answer is no. Absolutely not. A customer relationship that looks perfectly fine at entry can become incredibly toxic later on. Behaviors change, counterparties shift around, the velocity of funds might suddenly spike out of nowhere, or they might start operating in new high-risk jurisdictions. Sometimes a totally legitimate business is quietly bought out by an organized crime ring. So what looks safe on day 1 might be highly suspicious on day 100. And that is a terrifying blind spot if nobody is continuously watching the gates. And this brilliantly illustrates the core dynamic at play here. It's the ultimate test of expectation versus reality. On one hand, you have the expected profile, right? That's what the bank thinks it knows about you based on that initial onboarding. On the other hand, you have real-time behavior. Imagine your local neighborhood bakery. You expect local deposits, maybe flour purchases, payroll, a repair bill for a broken oven. That's the expectation. Now, what if that exact same bakery suddenly starts receiving millions of dollars in cross-border wire transfers from shell companies? The reality is violently clashing with the expectation. That delta, that gap between what we expect and what is actually happening, well, that is exactly where financial crime hides.
Moving right along to section 2, how transaction monitoring works. Let's define what this system actually is, because I promise you it's way more than just some piece of software you install and forget about. Transaction monitoring is the ongoing, continuous review of transactions to find unusual, suspicious, or illicit activity. Global watchdogs like the Financial Action Task Force and the FFIEC, they link this directly to a broader, risk-based approach. It is a vital foundation. It's about constantly asking, hey, does this transaction make sense for this specific person right now? It takes that static data from onboarding and breathes life into it, turning it into an active, living security perimeter. So, what are these systems actually hunting for? The practical red flags are genuinely fascinating, and they tend to group into a few distinct behaviors. Sometimes it's all about speed. Think rapid pass-through activity, where money enters an account and is just instantly wired right back out to muddy the audit trail. Other times it's about volume, like structuring. This is a classic game where bad actors break large sums of dirty cash into smaller deposits, keeping them just under that $10,000 reporting threshold so they don't get noticed. And very often, it's about the who and the where. Unusual counterparties, shady cross-border flows, or sudden reliance on mule accounts, where everyday people let their accounts be used to move illicit funds. It's literally rapid-fire digital detective work happening in the background every single second of the day. But here's the catch. Transaction monitoring isn't just a generic library of rules you buy off the shelf. It is a comprehensive control capability. It requires combining really deep customer intelligence with highly specific monitoring logic. Because look, if the due diligence data feeding the system is poor, the monitoring will inevitably be poor. It's the classic garbage in, garbage out scenario. The algorithm is only as smart as the human intelligence feeding it. Monitoring is only truly effective when it assesses transactions against what is specifically expected for that exact customer, that specific product, and that particular geography.
Which brings us to section 3, the Calibration Balancing Act. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the tension it shows. It's the classic Goldilocks problem of compliance. If your monitoring scenarios are too broad, the bank is absolutely crushed by false positives. Imagine an alarm that goes off every single time the wind blows. Eventually, people just stop listening to the alarm, right?
Investigators drown in paperwork, they suffer from alert fatigue, and they miss the real threats hidden in all that noise. But if you make the scenarios too narrow just to save time and reduce the paperwork, meaningful criminal activity slips right through the cracks, completely unnoticed. Finding that perfect middle ground, calibrating the system just right so it catches the bad guys without paralyzing the bank, is an incredibly difficult balancing act. And regulators are paying very close attention to how firms handle that balance. They are no longer satisfied with firms merely having a monitoring system on paper. Regulators expect firms to intimately understand how well it actually works in practice. For instance, the UK's Financial Conduct Authority recently updated its guidance, explicitly demanding actual intelligence value from these systems. Similarly, global watchdogs demand proof of tested outcomes. They want to see rigorous transaction testing to prove the calibration is actually effective. They don't just want a checked regulatory box, they want a working net. Let's pivot to Section 4, Governance and Human Oversight. So the crucial point is that technology alone just cannot solve financial crime. It requires intense human oversight. Human leaders have to actively govern the system to maintain a healthy Bank Secrecy Act compliance program. Senior management really needs to ask the tough questions. Things like, are we generating way too many useless alerts? Do we have this massive backlog of unreviewed files just gathering dust somewhere? Criminals evolve incredibly fast, so leaders must ask, are we keeping up with current criminal typologies, or are we stuck looking for yesterday's crimes? Ultimately, does this entire control framework actually remain aligned with the firm's true risk profile? Transaction monitoring is just as much a human governance issue as it is a software issue. Without leadership, the technology just drifts into irrelevance. And finally, Section 5, the bridge to action. Let's move to and see how this builds across the entire life cycle of an account. In Step 1, customer due diligence serves as the entry point. That's where an initial profile is built and the baseline expectation is set. Step 2 is transaction monitoring. This acts as the critical bridge over time, continuously testing the waters and comparing reality against that baseline. Now, if that monitoring catches something truly suspicious and a human investigator confirms it, it leads to Step 3, filing a suspicious activity report, or SAR. So you see, monitoring is the vital engine that surfaces the behavior, making it the essential bridge connecting a static customer file to the very dynamic act of alerting law enforcement. What you should really take away from this is that without this bridge, firms essentially lose their main tool for identifying financial crime after the ink dries on the onboarding paperwork. This ongoing scrutiny is the absolute cornerstone of the reporting system. It's the practical, day-to-day discipline that ensures customer activity actually remains lawful. It literally transforms compliance from a one-time hurdle at the front door into a continuous state of vigilance. I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Without effective, ongoing monitoring, are banks actually catching criminals? Or are they just meticulously documenting their access to the global financial system? Wow. It's a heavy question, right? And it underscores the massive stakes involved in getting this architecture right. When it works, it protects the integrity of the global economy. But when it fails, it simply gives bad actors a documented free pass. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep analyzing, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.